Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own Hands Where I Can See Them, or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by FlyingBlueBirds, and you can find a link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by Britt. Hands Where I Can See Them. Chapter 4. Show Them. The next 3 weeks flew by quickly. There was no major case for Tally, just a couple of break-ins, a car theft, and an alleged kidnapping that in the end had turned out to be one big misunderstanding. But Tally wasn't complaining. Quite the contrary, actually. She was absorbing the experience of each assignment. She knew she could take just as much away from a seemingly boring case as from a high-profile murder. With each passing day, she got used a bit more to life at the Boston Police Department. She was getting along well with basically all of her co-workers, and had learned to avoid the exception that was Detective Buttonwood. She was glad he hadn't made any more direct advances, but could still feel his eyes on her, whenever he thought she wasn't looking. Tally knew this probably wasn't over, but for now, was perfectly content with simply ignoring the existence of the male detective. Much to her own surprise, working together with Alder also went well for most parts. Sure, Alder still seemed to be annoyed by Tally's sole existence, but she didn't let it show that often anymore. On good days, Tally even got a quick good morning when she arrived for her shift, and Alder would usually reply to her good night when she was leaving in the evening with a curt but not entirely unfriendly nod. Generally, Alder had started to speak a bit more when Tally was around. Not about herself, obviously. The older detective would probably rather eat her own hand than share any personal details with Tally. No. They mostly talked about case-related things. Maybe even did some small talk. That Tally initiated. But it was a start, and definitely more than what Tally had expected at the beginning of their partnership. She had also begun to notice tiny things about Alder. Not that she spent maybe a little too much time staring at her partner. No, that was absolutely not the case. She had just accidentally come across some random observations. Like the way she kept playing with the charm on her silver bracelet when she was feeling uncomfortable, or how she always straightened her shoulders just a little bit more to appear taller when she was talking to her male colleagues, or, and Tally found that especially distractive, how she was biting her lower lip when she was very focused on something and thought nobody was looking. Alder was still a great big mystery to Tally, but it was things like these that made her appear more human, that made Tally understand her at least a tiny bit better. The slow weeks ended on the day of Shane Creighton's trial. Up until this point, the interest of the media in the case had been surprisingly low. There had been a couple of newspaper articles about the arrest and Alder, as the leading detective had given out a short written statement to the press, but that had been about it. The real outburst was expected after the trial, in case Creighton would actually be found guilty of murdering his wife. However, when Tally entered the courthouse on the morning of the trial, the press was the least of her concerns. She couldn't really explain why, but the fact that she was about to testify in front of a judge was making her incredibly nervous. She had spent all night going over the case files again and was almost certain that her sleep-deprived brain would mix some of the most important details up. In the worst case, this would make her appear like an unreliable witness. Her statement would be ignored and Creighton would be found not guilty. So absolutely no pressure on her side. This was going to be fun. She was glad to find Captain Bellwether and some of the other detectives standing in front of the courtroom. She greeted everyone with a short good morning and then did her best to follow the lively conversation that was going on. She failed miserably, because she was too busy stifling her yawns and stopping her tired eyes from closing. It was Detective Alder who finally managed to tear Tally out of her doze, or more precisely, Detective Alder's elegant black pantsuit, which immediately attracted Tally's full attention when her partner entered the building a couple of minutes later, 2 cups of coffee in her hand. While Tally was beginning a serious internal debate about how Alder managed to look flawless in whatever she was wearing, and why she looked as well-rested as ever, even though Tally knew she had left the department even after herself yesterday, her partner took one glance at her to recognize her misery. "Craven, with me." Her tone didn't leave any room for discussion, and Tally wordlessly followed her around the corner to a quieter part of the hallway. Alder handed her one of the coffee cups. "Drink up, and please be careful. I didn't bring a spare shirt this time." Tally completely blamed her sleep-deprived brain for what she said next. "I bet this suit would look even better without one. The judge would definitely be on your side." It took all of Alder's self-control not to choke on her coffee and ruin her shirt herself this time. Tally's head immediately turned crimson red. "Craven, what the hell?" "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to sound like Detective Buttonwood. I just, apparently bad humor is how I cope in stressful situations. I barely slept last night." Her point was still standing, though. Alder, in this suit, without a shirt? Yes, please. "Craven, you still with me?" Sorry, my mind was elsewhere." "Yeah, I bet it was." There it was again, that slight, knowing smirk on Alder's face that was making Tally weak in her knees. She didn't really know how to respond to her statement, and waited silently until Alder saved her from the awkward situation. "Anyhow," Alder's tone was getting more serious again, "after seeing you lose your mind over this for the last days, I knew you'd be stressed today. But I didn't expect you to be such a mess. Come on, Craven, pull it together." "You noticed?" "Believe it or not, but you are not the only one who's good at observing people. You got quieter with each passing day. You barely spoke yesterday. No annoying questions, no unnecessary small talk, not even your usual good night when you left. You kept zooming out of our conversations. Of course I noticed." "I'm sorry." Tally thought she had been more subtle, and the fact that Alder knew how insecure she was about all of this only made her embarrassment grow. She looked down, not wanting to see the disappointment that was probably already lying in Alder's eyes. Showing weakness was usually out of the question when dealing with her. All the more surprising were the words that left Alder's mouth next. "Stop apologizing. There's no need. But we can't have you in there looking like you're 3 steps away from a full-blown panic attack. Look at me." The older detective stepped forward, placed her finger under Tally's chin, and gently forced her to look up. "You did great police work with that case. We have Creighton's confession. You were there. You know what happened. You know the truth. So you go and tell them. If you forget something, someone will ask for clarification, and you will give it to them. It really is that simple. No need to beat yourself up over this." Tally was mesmerized by Alder's impossibly blue eyes. She felt her hand wander from her chin up to her cheek, felt Alder's fingers gently grazing it for the briefest moment until she broke the contact. "Thank you." Her own words were barely more than a whisper, and Alder stepped back slightly, giving her some desperately needed breathing space. "Don't thank me. Show them." "Yes, General Alder." She laughed and saluted playfully. It hit her a moment too late that Alder might not be very fond of that nickname, but her partner only returned her smile. "Pep talk is over. You're dismissed, cadet." When they walked back to the rest of the group, Tally felt as if a huge weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She was still nervous when she finally entered the courtroom, but somehow knew everything would go all right. Which was exactly what happened. Tally gave her statement in easy and structured sentences, answered a couple of questions, and was released again. Only 2 hours later, Shane Creighton was sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison for the second-degree murder of his wife. Everything went just as expected. until Tally and Alder left the courthouse together, and were greeted by flashing lights and screaming people. Alder reacted before Tally could even understand what was happening. She simply grabbed Tally's arm and immediately drug her back into the safe walls of the building. Oh, hell no. What on earth is going on outside? Remember the disaster hunting press vultures I warned you about? Well, it looks like an actually convicted, wife-murdering politician sadly seems to be finally worth their time. A pity, really. Alder appeared all tough on the outside, but Tally could see that the sudden press appearances had thrown her off. She had crossed her arms in front of her body and her eyes were a bit unfocused. So, what are we going to do about them? They won't leave without one of us giving a statement, which means I can either wait until Captain Bellwether drags me out of there, or I can try and keep my dignity by just dealing with it by myself. Her words sounded bitter, and Tally suddenly understood that getting out there was actually scaring Alder for some reason, which is why she had put up her defense wall higher than ever. She was afraid to look vulnerable. Tally stepped forward and gently put her hands on Alder's arms. It was the first time she initiated any form of body contact, and she had half expected her partner to draw back immediately. But Alder didn't move and only looked at her slightly puzzled. But we can't let you go out there, looking like you're 3 steps away from a full-blown panic attack. Alder couldn't hide a tiny smirk from appearing on her face when she recognized her words from earlier, that were now coming out of Tally's mouth. You did great police work with that case. Creighton got what he deserved. You were there. You know what happened. You know the truth. So you go and tell them. It really is that simple. No need to beat yourself up over this. Who's the general now, huh? Alder's voice sounded softer than Tally has ever heard it. She smiled at her warmly. I know you don't want me to, but I can always get out there with you. But Alder only shook her head in response. No, I'm not putting you through this. If you want to help me, get out through the back entrance, grab a cab, and tell the driver to wait for me in the front. The faster I'll get away from this, the better. Tally nodded and was already on her way through the building when she heard Alder calling her once more. Oh, and Craven? She turned around again. Yes? Thank you. She watched how Alder took one last deep breath, then straightened her shoulders and walked out the front door, where the screaming mass of reporters was already waiting for her. Tally didn't waste much time after this, and while her brain was still processing the last interaction with Alder and the fact that she had actually managed to get her to lower her guard slightly, she hurried out of the building and got into one of the cabs that were waiting on the side of the road. Just as Alder had requested, she asked the driver to wait for her partner at the main entrance of the courthouse. The space in front of the building was packed with people, and Tally couldn't spot Alder in the crowd, no matter how hard she tried. So, she waited. It took almost 15 minutes until she could finally see the older detective walking towards the cab. Tally could feel her stomach drop the second she saw her. The look on her face was not the one that Tally had been hoping for. She looked pissed. Like really pissed. Something had definitely not gone according to plan. Her suspicions were confirmed when Alder climbed into the back seat next to her with an annoyed groan. I cannot believe these fucking indelicate idiots. What happened? But Alder only waved her hands in resignation. Doesn't matter. Her words sounded final, and Tally knew better than to attack her with questions. Of course, she desperately wanted to find out what had made Alder so pissed, but if she asked her now, her partner would probably only snap at her, instead of giving her an answer. So, she stayed silent, something Alder seemed to be very grateful for. They didn't talk for the rest of the drive, and Tally could see Alder play with the charm on her bracelet the entire time. The rest of the day went by quickly. Tally was still incredibly tired from her restless night, but the amount of paperwork that was waiting on her desk was demanding her full attention. She ignored the grumbling stomach and went straight to work. As soon as they arrived back at the department, time flew by. She barely registered how it was getting dark and darker outside. and soon the bullpen started to empty. Around 9 p.m., she finally gave in to her pounding headache, turned off her computer, and realized that everyone else had already left. Abigail had today off, so she took out her phone to send Raelle a quick message, asking her to pick her up once her shift at the hospital ended, not really in the mood to head home at the time of the day without company. She was feeling slightly dizzy when she got up from her chair, probably a result of the fact that she still hadn't eaten. She ignored the feeling, simply grabbed her stuff and headed out into the already dark hallway towards the elevator. The whole building was quiet, and the dim light made the shows of the empty desk appear almost scary. Tally knew she was being silly. This was probably one of the safest places in the whole city, and her tired brain was only playing tricks on her. Still, the way to the elevator suddenly felt incredibly long. Her head was zoning out, and she was starting to see black spots dancing in front of her eyes. Suddenly, the room was spinning, and Tally had to lean against a wall for support. She closed her eyes and forced herself to take a couple of deep breaths, trying to regain some control over her body. When she opened them again, she was greeted by a familiar pair of striking blue eyes, looking at her with genuine concern. "Craven, are you okay?" Tally had been so busy avoiding fainting that she had completely missed Alder entering the hallway. She only nodded in response, not quite trusting her voice. "What happened? Should I call for help?" "I'm fine, really. Just my body reminding me that a night without sleep, not enough food, and fast movements after sitting at my desk for hours are probably not the best combination. You should listen to your body, Craven. Don't forget to take care of yourself." Alder didn't want to lecture Tally any further, but still seemed concerned. For the second time that day, she reached out and placed her hand on Tally's arm. "I believe you when you say you're feeling better, but at least let me walk you downstairs." "Okay." When she pushed herself from the wall, though, her legs were still shaking so much that she was struggling to stay upright. Of course, Alder had noticed this as well, and Tally could feel her hand move from her arm around her lower back, supporting her. She waited for another second until she could feel Tally's body slowly steadying itself, and then gently guided her through the hallway and into the elevator. When the elevator reached the entrance hall, Tally immediately spotted Raelle, who was waiting at the reception desk, in deep conversation with Scylla, who was apparently just on her way to head home as well. Tally knew that look on her friend's face, and the way her eyes lit up whenever Scylla was saying something. She made a mental note to ask Raelle about that later. Raelle turned at the sound of the elevator and greeted Tally with a grin. However, when she spotted Alder next to her arms still protectively put around Tally, and saw the still slightly puzzled expression on her face, she froze mid-sentence, and worry appeared on her face. "What happened?" "I hope you know that I'm going to drag you to lunch every day from now on. Hell, I'll even make you cute little packages if I have to. Abigail, it's enough, really. I've just had a lot on my mind, plus that court hearing was really stressing me out. Believe me, Raelle has already given me the full medical lecture on proper nutrition and rest. I've heard it all. Then you better follow her words next time. Trust me, I will." Abigail decided to let it go for now, and Tally let out a grateful sigh. She was currently curled up on her couch. The TV was playing in the background, but the sound was muted, so nobody really paid attention. Her head was resting on Abigail's lap, and she was gently combing her hair with her fingers. Raelle was sitting on the other end of the couch and was currently making a face at Abigail to let her know that she was totally on her side for once. "Sorry, Tal. I didn't want to upset you. It's just, you got us really worried." "I know, I'm sorry." Tally's phone vibrated, and she quickly checked her texts. "How are you feeling?" "A." She smiled. Alder texting her outside of work? Well, that was a first. She immediately started to type a reply. "I'm fine. A bit annoyed because my roommates keep lecturing me. I could ask you the same, though, after the day you've been having." C. She pressed send and for a while absent-mindedly listened to Abigail talking about the robbery she was currently investigating. Then her phone vibrated again. "Can't say I blame them. Don't worry about me. I'm a big girl. A. I'm taller than you. C. Liar, liar, pants on fire. A. Telly grinned at the last message, which caused Rael to eye her suspiciously. Hey, what are you getting all smiley about? Who's that secret boyfriend you're texting? Telly only rolled her eyes. No boyfriend. Girlfriend, then? Shut up, Rael. You know I'm not into women. It's just Alder. She hated how her cheeks immediately reddened at the thought of Rael calling Alder her girlfriend. You and Alder, huh? Rael wiggled her eyebrows. Ouch! Telly had thrown one of the couch pillows right into Rael's face. She just wanted to check on me, make sure I'm okay. If you say so. I do. Now, can we please talk about something else? You and Dr. Ramshorn, for example. I wasn't aware you two knew each other. The way Rael's cheeks turned slightly pink at the mention of Scylla's name told Telly everything she needed to know. Aha! Gotcha! Well, I didn't know her until today, but since you took an awfully long time to get down to the entrance hall, thanks for that, by the way, we started talking. She's nice. Rael was actually blushing now and was suddenly very interested in the pattern of the pillow that was still lying in her lap. Telly knew she didn't like to speak about feelings and that sort of stuff, but Abigail wouldn't let her off the hook that easily. Instead, she raised her eyebrows expectantly. She's nice, and? She might have asked me for my number and if I wanted to go to the police ball with her. Rael mumbled quietly. Abigail cheered and Telly sat up slightly to give her a high five. Way to go, Rael! On her way back on Abigail's lap, she caught a glimpse of the images on the TV, where the news reporter was currently speaking, and suddenly froze when she recognized the same courthouse she had just been at this morning. Abs, can you turn the sound on, please? Yeah, one sec. Why are you so serious all of a... Oh. Abigail stopped talking when none other than Detective Alder appeared on the screen. After getting arrested 3 weeks ago, today, Shane Creighton was convicted for the second-degree murder of his wife. After the trial, which was described by bystanders as quick and indisputable, lead detective Sarah Alder was available to answer some burning questions. The camera zoomed in on Alder and Telly couldn't get around to appreciate how stunning she looked. She appeared comfortable in front of the cameras. There was no hint of the insecurity Telly had seen in her eyes, only minutes before that video was taken. Instead, she radiated a certain superiority, as she answered a couple of questions about the case in clear and direct words. She was polite and absolutely professional, and all of the reporters seemed to be completely content with the answer she was giving. That was until a rather short woman with a pixie cut stepped forward to address Alder. Detective Alder, Tanya Flynn, freelance. Hi. This question is not directly connected to the Creighton case, but this is your first public appearance since your sudden removal from the Camarilla serial killer case. The change in Alder's demeanor was instant. She stopped smiling, and her professional facade started to crumble. She stared directly at the woman, assessing her wordlessly for a couple of seconds. This case is in no way connected to Shane Creighton. Still, people are wondering, why did the murder stop right when you were taken off the case? Is there a connection? Should the people be scared that the Camarilla killer could be back any time? Are we safe? Alder's voice was cold as ice. I will not be giving any statements about the Camarilla killer. He is gone and no longer a threat. It's time that people realize that and start to care about the actual problems we are facing. If you would excuse me now, I have other obligations I need to attend. She left it at that, ignoring all of the other raised hands, and walked away from the crowd, with the same expression she had on her face when Telly had spotted her from the cab seconds later. Oh, damn, Rael whistled quietly through her teeth. That woman pissed her off. Telly was really confused. I have no clue why that question rattled her so much. I guess she's just tired of being constantly asked about a cold case. Yeah, maybe. Telly shrugged it off, but wasn't really convinced. She had also realized that Abigail had suddenly gotten very quiet and was shifting uncomfortably in her seat. Abs? Do you have something to say about that? Abigail was visibly struggling. Telly, I'm sorry, but I can't. You can't what? I can't tell you. You have to ask her yourself. It's the only way. I'm not even supposed to know about what happened. Please just drop it. Tally raised her hands in defeat, but her good mood had vanished completely. Fine, she snapped. Abigail was reaching for her hand and squeezing it lightly. Tally, please don't be mad. You know I trust you with my life, but this is not about me. You will understand. Tally only sighed in response. It was frustrating, but she understood where Abigail was coming from, so she couldn't really be angry with her. Okay. Just because she promised Abigail not to bother her with that again, though, didn't mean she wasn't allowed to do her own research on that. So, when she headed to bed a couple of minutes later, she told herself that her body would survive a couple of more minutes without sleep, and instead opened her laptop and typed Sarah Alder, Camarilla Murders into the search bar. Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.